Imagine waking up one day to discover you're exactly average. Not prosperous, not struggling, just middle of the country. That's the paradox millions of Americans live with when it comes to money. On the surface, it feels like everyone is getting ahead. You see houses, careers, vacations, gadgets. But when you dig into the actual numbers, you realize something uncomfortable. Most people are barely ahead of where they were a decade ago. So in 2026, what does average actually look like in the United States? How much debt does the typical family carry? What does the median income really buy? How much does the average American save or fail to save? And crucially, how do you compare to the real national picture? The answers aren't just statistics, they're a mirror, and the reflection might be more honest than we're used to. The income reality. Median versus expectation. When people talk about income, they often cite figures that sound impressive in isolation. 6 figures, comfortable wages, raises, promotions. But median income, the point where half earn more and half earn less, says something different. In 2026, the median household income in the U.S. is hovering in the mid-$60,000 per year when adjusted for inflation. For an individual working full-time, that means many Americans are earning between $40,000 and $55,000 annually. Compare that to the rising cost of housing, healthcare, childcare, student loans, and transportation, and suddenly that headline number doesn't feel as powerful as it sounds. That's the first lesson. Income statistics look good until you compare them to real costs. Millions of Americans might feel income stagnation because wages haven't kept up with expenses. And while the economy has grown, the share of that growth that flows into everyday pockets has been comparatively slow. The debt burden, the silent pressure. If income tells one story, debt tells another. In 2026, total U.S. household debt has climbed past prior peaks, with the average American owing tens of thousands of dollars across various categories. Mortgage debt remains the largest component, unsurprising when housing prices have surged, but credit card balances, auto loans, and personal loans have also increased significantly. The typical household carries thousands of dollars in credit card debt, often at high interest rates. Auto loans have grown in size as new vehicle prices climb. Student loan balances remain a generational legacy for young professionals, despite relief programs and forgiveness headlines. The result, even households with seemingly solid incomes are spending a large portion of their earnings servicing debt. Payments that could go towards savings, retirement, or investment are instead channeled into interest and principal payments. This dynamic doesn't just slow progress, it traps many Americans in cycles of financial stress. Housing, the affordability squeeze. Where income and debt intersect most painfully is housing. Home ownership was once the centerpiece of the American dream. It's still a goal for many, but affordability has become a barrier for millions. In 2026, the median home price in many urban and suburban markets sits well about historical ratios relative to income. Houses that were once considered attainable now require substantial down payments and high monthly mortgages. Renters, meanwhile, face their own version of pressure. With rental rates rising in many regions, even modest apartments can eat a quarter or more of a household's take-home pay. For a family making the median income, this leaves less room for saving, investing, or unexpected expenses. What this means in practical terms is that for many people, housing is no longer a place you live, it's a cost you manage. Savings and emergency buffers, a fragile reality. One of the clearest barometers of financial health is savings, emergency funds, rainy day buffers. In 2026, a startling number of Americans remain without a robust cushion. Surveys show that a large portion of households would struggle to cover even a $1,000 unexpected expense without borrowing. Many have little to nothing in readily accessible savings. Retirement balances tell a similar story. Though participation in employer plans has grown, the median balance for people approaching retirement remains far lower than what experts typically recommend for decades of post-work life. This doesn't mean people aren't trying. It means saving is often preempted by necessities: rent, mortgage costs, health care, child care, education, debt payments. The average American isn't idle. Resources are simply stretched thin. Retirement readiness, the invisible crisis. Retirement used to be a long-term calculation: earn, save, invest, and withdraw later. Today, it feels more like a gamble. Despite decades of emphasis on 401ks, IRAs, and personal savings, many Americans face retirement readiness shortfalls. People in their 50s and 60s often report anxiety about whether they have enough to retire comfortably or at all. Compound growth works when contributions keep up, but when income rises slowly and expenses rise faster, saving for decades becomes a steeper challenge. It's not just about money, it's about time. People don't just want wealth, they want freedom. And retirement readiness statistics suggest freedom is farther out of reach than most admit. Consumer spending. Comfortable masks, fragile reality. If you look at retail sales data, consumer spending appears robust. People go out to eat, they travel, they buy gadgets, the economy hums. But spending isn't always a sign of financial strength. For many, spending is a necessity or a coping mechanism. People buy things not because they have surplus, but because debt and living costs leave little real saving capacity. It's a fragile equilibrium: spend to live, borrow to supplement. That's why retail booms can coexist with personal financial stress. It's not that people don't value money, it's that they're forced to allocate it in survival categories first. Households with the same income can have radically different financial lives. One might rent a modest apartment, drive a reliable used car, save some percentage of income, and carry minimal debt. The other might live paycheck to paycheck in the same income bracket, carry high credit card balances, lease a new car with payments, and struggle with medical bills. The average masks that disparity. Averages smooth over extremes, but real financial lives are not smooth. They're jagged, unpredictable, and emotional. So when you hear the average American makes X, remember it's an axis, not a verdict. Generational divide. What 2026 looks like by age. Younger generations face a different financial landscape than their parents. Millennials and Gen Z navigate higher education costs, rising rents, delayed home ownership, and competing priorities like healthcare and family formation. Many delay milestones like marriage or buying their first home, not because they don't want them, but because economic constraints are real and persistent. Gen X often finds itself sandwiched, supporting children and aging parents while trying to save for retirement without clear windfalls or market guarantees. Boomers, on average, have higher asset accumulation, but even here the picture is mixed. Many continue to work past traditional retirement age, not out of ambition, but necessity. These generational patterns shape expectations and realities in ways that simple averages hide. Income mobility, the myth versus the data. For decades, Americans have been told that hard work leads to upward mobility, but the data paints a more nuanced picture in 2026. Moving from one income bracket to another is harder than most people remember. Mobility exists, but it's constrained by structural barriers: geography, education costs, healthcare expenses, childcare responsibilities, and the rising cost of living. Opportunity hasn't disappeared, but finding it has become more complex than simply working harder. The consequence? Many people feel stuck in place even when they're working relentlessly. Savings versus debt, the balancing act. The financial lives of most Americans in 2026 are defined not by one statistic, but by tension. The tension between saving and debt, between hope and fear, between planning for the future and surviving the present. In most cases, the math isn't glamorous. It's urgent, it's complex, it's real. and it's a reality millions experience quietly every day. So how do you compare? If you're making around the median income, carrying some debt, trying to save but feeling behind, that's far closer to average than most people admit. If you have a cushion, little debt, and a growing savings account, you're statistically ahead of the pack. If you're struggling to keep up month to month, that still fits within the larger pattern of the modern American financial experience. Average isn't a moral judgment, it's a mirror, one that reflects the system people live inside, one of rising costs, slow wage growth, and relentless pressure. But statistics aren't destiny, they're context. You can compare yourself not just to the average, but to the trends, to the goals, to the life you want to build. That's where control begins. 2026 money statistics for the average American show something critical. We're not all thriving. We're not all struggling catastrophically. We're mostly somewhere in between.
Like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon.